you. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about our democratic rights under attack, SB 106, abortion, and the fight back in Pennsylvania. Again, thank you so much for joining us. I realize that the chat is disabled. We are working on that. I know I asked you all to say hi. Hopefully we will have that function up and running soon, so you'll all be able to let us know where you're tuning in from. So thank you for your patience. Next slide, please. Okay, so for some time now, the far right has been united in their strategy to overturn basic functions of the government. By achieving a majority on the Supreme Court, they've been able to set the stage for a judicial and legislative coup. We've already seen them take away our federally protected rights to an abortion with the Dobbs decision, and a lack of sustained militant response to that has emboldened them even further. Soon they'll decide on the Moore v. Harper case and something called independent state legislature theory, which would eliminate any pretense of democracy that we have left. If the court rules in their favor, that would mean that state legislatures, a majority of which are controlled by Republicans, would have the sole authority to nominate electors to the Electoral College instead of this being decided by the people through voting. So instead of claiming election fraud and trying to stop Congress from certifying election results, like we saw on January 6th, they would be able to steal elections more quietly, earlier in the process, and completely legally by claiming election fraud and putting forth electors decided by Republican-controlled state legislatures instead of by the vote. And the Democrats aren't really raising the alarm on this. We haven't seen much action or even news stories about this. The Democratic Party is fractured and disorganized, and their main electoral strategy has been fear-mongering. In fact, this election was decided basically on abortion rights alone. And this is also playing out locally with state legislation like SB 106. Next slide, please. And I'm going to pass it over to Katie.
Yep, so I'm going to get us started talking about what SB 106 is. So Pennsylvania Senate Bill 106 is a package of amendments to the Pennsylvania Constitution that vastly alter reproductive care and democratic rights in PA.
Katie, we're having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I'm sorry.
Is this a little better?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So yeah, Pennsylvania Senate Bill 106 is a package of amendments to the PA Constitution. And the governor of Pennsylvania cannot veto a proposed constitutional amendment as it stands. So if this is passed, constitutional amendments also serve as a precedent for how the Pennsylvania judiciary must rule on cases. So by introducing these measures as constitutional amendments rather than as pieces of legislation, the PA legislature, which has been dominated by Republicans for quite some time, is purposefully bypassing the existing systems of checks and balances that we already have in the Pennsylvania government. And this is a bill that, if passed, is expected to go through a referendum. And amendments of this type do need to be passed through both legislatures before being put to a referendum as per Article 11, Section 1 of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And this would go to vote in a special election, a primary, or a general election, depending on the timing. It could be as early as this upcoming spring or possibly later, depending on if it is able to go through and how quickly. And if a majority of the voters do vote for the amendment, it will become part of our state constitution. And therefore, it would only be able to be repealed through the same process of being rewritten as an amendment. You can go to the next slide. So if Senate Bill 106 passes, it would do a couple of things. The first thing is that Pennsylvania courts would be prohibited from protecting the right to an abortion itself. But due to the wording of the legislation, it would also prohibit the courts from protecting any right relating to abortion, which can include contraceptive access and related medical procedures. In states where abortion bans have already gone through, we've seen this manifest as people having trouble treating things like ectopic pregnancies, infertility, things that are also seemingly unrelated, like cancer, epilepsy, arthritis, lupus, psoriasis, and even dermatological issues. There are a lot of physicians in these states who are very nervous to perform medical procedures that could be skewed as potentially aiding or abetting an abortion, even though, like, if their processes are not even close to the same. And additionally, Pennsylvanians with like life-threatening pregnancies would be at risk here as well, or even things that are considered exception cases in red states, such as the result of rape or incest. These folks would also be denied access to safe medical care, even for minors and children. And this would pave the way for abortion to become fully illegal in Pennsylvania by taking away the court's ability to turn down these proposed abortion restrictions. And we've seen across the country that court rulings have been the main barrier to abortion bans going into effect. And this would seek to wipe that power away. Is my sound coming back a little bit better now? Okay. All right, and in terms of changes to the Pennsylvania state legislature, this would allow the legislature to override restrictions and the state of emergency that would be in the power to be declared by a governor. And this measure is actually directly in response to Pennsylvania Governor Wolf declaring a state of emergency to fight the COVID-19 crisis. It's seen by a lot of Republican folks as kind of an anti-authoritarian measure, even though these are things that are being done for public health, public safety, the general good. So this would greatly reduce the ability of state governments to address things like public health emergencies or even natural disasters, things that affect the entire community. Another effect of this legislation would be that the lieutenant governor and the governor would have to run on the same ticket during elections. There is not really a point to this. It's just a very undemocratic process. Usually both of them used to be able to be, well, still are able to be chosen directly by voters. But this is just another chance to take it out of the hand of voters and keep things in the hands of the ruling class, essentially. And lastly, this amendment would grant election audit privileges strictly to the Auditor General of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania actually already has a system in place to audit elections through the legislature, and we've seen this come up because multiple counties in Pennsylvania have refused to certify election results, even despite court orders. We've seen a lot of contention about election results, especially following January 6th. This is definitely something that's not going away. And so this amendment would take away the existing audit process, which involves multiple branches of government and checks and balances. And instead, it would all be in the hands of one person, the Auditor General, who would oversee the entire process. And our current Pennsylvania Auditor General is a man by the name of Timothy DeFore. He is the first Republican Auditor General that the state has had since 1997. Additionally, this amendment would require the state legislature to appoint an independent auditor in years when the Auditor General would be up for re-election every 4 years or so. So that means at least every 4 years, the legislature would essentially be auditing itself rather than having an outside process of auditing that would be significantly more fair. We can go to the next slide. This is also an attack on voting rights in Pennsylvania. We've seen this also happening all across the country. Things like voter ID laws, they really disproportionately affect the most marginalized people in our communities, such as people of color, low income people, people who maybe struggle or don't have the time because they're working to go get valid voter IDs or keep their IDs up to date. And all in all, this is just a cover for another layer of voter suppression and introducing new barriers for people to just exercise their basic democratic rights. We don't get many of them. You get to have a vote every couple of years, and even that is too much for some people. So this amendment would introduce new voting restrictions, such as living in the same residence for at least 60 days in order to be eligible to register for that address to vote. It also requires presenting an ID when voting by mail-in ballot, as well as during the window before an election, which makes mail-in voting nearly impossible, as most people who vote by mail-in ballot do so specifically because they are physically unable to go to a polling location. So this is just putting up another hurdle for the most marginalized people, and especially, of course, affects students, disabled people, and rural voters as well, who may live like very, very far from their polling locations. We can go to the next slide. And now I'll just address a couple of false narratives about this bill that have come up. So some of the supporters of the bill have said, this leaves the decision up to the people, let the people decide. This will be a totally fair election, and the people will ultimately make the right decision. But according to a poll occurred in May 2022 by Franklin Marshall, 84% of Pennsylvania voters already said that abortion should be legal under all or certain circumstances, and only 16% believe that abortion should be illegal. So Pennsylvania voters have expressed absolutely no desire for getting rid of the right to abortion. They have not expressed any desire to amend the Constitution, and they voted to retain the rights that we already have. So this no right to abortion amendment is bundled into SB 106 alongside a voting restriction. So to claim the spirit is, a free and fair election, letting people decide, is like absolutely not true. It's totally disingenuous. Another objection we've heard to this is that it doesn't impact or interfere with our current state law. This also is not entirely true. While it's true that SB 106 would not automatically ban abortion in Pennsylvania, its express purpose is to enable the legislature to pass more severe abortion restrictions by eliminating relevant state-based rights. And again, this is the expressed goal of its legislative sponsors in the Pennsylvania legislature, all of whom are still in office currently and still serving following this midterm election. And so it's very clear that eliminating abortion access down the line is 100% the goal of this bill. And finally, the last objection that we'll touch on is that this no right to abortion section of the bill only impacts the public funding of abortion. So currently, taxpayer money is not spent on elective abortions in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The only publicly funded abortions in PA are those that are related to pregnancies that are life-threatening, or those exception cases that I mentioned earlier, such as things like instances of rape or incest. And the language in SB 106 refers to taxpayer-funded abortions as well as potentially related healthcare options, like we said, which can include things like contraceptive access or other related medical procedures, and things like family planning services. The list just goes on and on. So passage of SB 106 would lead to the end of reproductive autonomy in the state. It could just totally get rid of all of these rights that we have worked so hard to establish over the past 50, 60, 70 years. So I will now pass it back to Echo.
Thank you, Katie. So, democracy, the liberal democracy that we have as it exists, is flawed. Every right we have has been won through struggle and can be snatched away at any moment, especially in this two-party, liberal democracy that we have. Every 2 to 4 years, when the House or Senate or the presidency changes from one party to the next, our rights are continually being snatched away, and we're left to fight in the streets for them again every time. And undemocratic institutions like SCOTUS and the Senate maintain a class rule, where passing decisions like Dobbs can lay the groundwork for a state-by-state dismantling of our rights. And the right has been taking an openly and blatant anti-democratic line by, putting forth things like independent state legislature theory and SB 106, where, they basically are trying to take away any pretense of democracy by disregarding the people's votes and, rigging elections to turn out as they see fit. True democracy is socialist democracy, with mass participation at every level of decision making. And we can see how bills like SB 106 mirror what's happening on the national stage. Pennsylvania is now a testing ground for legislation like that. And, the Moore v. Harper case, that decision is going to have wide-reaching impacts for our entire country for a very long time. Um, okay, so we're gonna move on to a discussion with our panelists. We have some discussion questions that we'd like to talk to organizers who are really working on these things about. You can give me 1 second, please. I'm sorry. Okay. So, and again, I'm just opening this up to the panelists in general, but can you help us understand how the attack on democratic rights in Pennsylvania is connected to the larger national agenda of the far right?
You know what? I'll happen and I'll take that one
Thank you.
because I just want us to stop for a moment and think. Uh, After the election, the midterms, there was tons of propaganda going across all of the media apparatus saying that we should be excited that we stopped the red wave, right? There's this narrative where we're being actually conditioned to view what is taking place as this great victory. And I think that's disingenuous. I think it's also dangerous. And I think it downplays the larger implications of what we've seen take place. Instead of it being a short term goal, we as organizers have to make sure that we're communicating to the people on the ground that this is a very, very long game against a very evil, nefarious group of people considered the capitalist class who are putting things in place to make it incredibly difficult for what we're trying to accomplish across the country. And the thing about the national agenda component, with PA being a swing state, right? Typically, when they say a swing state, it typically means it can go either damn way. But it's not necessarily always true, right? Because there are people in place who are deliberately putting things in place to capture what is taking place here in Pennsylvania. Like Echo mentioned a moment ago, that PA has largely been a testing ground for new legislation. So this has been an area where, regardless of Republican or Democrat, have come and tried to put things in place here, as we saw with the slideshow with SB 106. If those things would have, and let me not speak as if it already has been a definite that SB 106 is not going to go forth, but if that was to go forth, the disastrous consequences of that would be something nationally other states would be able to say, hey, PA was able to be able to do this. PA put this in place. And that's what typically happens. You're able to build upon these things. And these organizations and these groups, these horrible people and these political parties are using states to build a national agenda and a national focus. So what we're seeing here is just literally an opportunity for them to put a small thing in place and literally roll it downhill and collect momentum and collect all these other resources and gain support all throughout the state. And then they can pass this foolishness off to other states. But I think the one thing that we as organizers have to do, we have to continue not to be lulled to sleep by what is being perceived as a victory. Yeah, there might have been a stop to the so-called red wave, but that's not as if we can all of a sudden reach across the aisle and shake hands with the Democratic Party. We have to treat them just the same way we continue to treat Republicans. People who are not for poor working class people should be considered as someone who has the potential of being an enemy or they are an enemy. And those people are people that we should be warning our comrades about, warning our neighbors about, and having a loud, angry, rallying voice around the desire and the need for us to continue to organize. So to sum it up, this component for the national aspect is literally on a state level, them trying to build momentum to broaden a national agenda.
Thank you so much. So can some of you help us understand the Democratic Party's response to this agenda?
Yeah, I can answer that. And I wanted to just say something. I think Elgin just put it so beautifully, and so correctly, that essentially the Democrats, you know, have been lulled to sleep. In regards to how they've responded to these attacks by the right wing, it has largely been inaction. And that's because the Democrats are complacent, because they think that all they have to do is to essentially put forward a negative program, to say, you should vote for us because we're not the Republicans. Currently, the Republicans look the most like the enemy, because they are the ones who are on the offensive, actually carrying out these assaults on our democracy. But the Democrats are just as much our enemy through inaction, because they allow the Republicans to completely walk over them on every single issue that they claim to care about. When it comes to abortion, the Democrats have had executive and legislative control, and yet they have completely allowed Roe v. Wade to be eviscerated. They allowed the Build Back Better bill to crumble into dust. Anytime the Democrats have had the opportunity to actually do something for poor and working people, they have completely fumbled the ball. Now, why is that? It is because, honestly, at the end of the day, the Democrats and the Republicans are simply different sides of the same coin. They're just both members of the capitalist class. Ultimately, the reason they don't care at all about this assault on our democratic rights is because it doesn't affect their bottom line. And it certainly doesn't affect the bottom line of the people who are lobbying them and making them rich. And so I think that when we look at the ways in which the Democrats have been complacent, like Elgin said, this has been a long historical process. The Republicans have been out organizing the Democrats on the grassroots and through social institutions for years. And what we're seeing now with this assault on our democratic rights is the product of decades and decades of right-wing organizing of different communities to get them to vote for policies that are regressive and hurt their own interests. One last thing that I want to say is just that I think another major issue with the way that Democrats have kind of responded to this attack is that they see current electorates as static. They see the current political climate as one that will never change. But we know that this is, I think, what the Republicans have really touched upon, and why they are absolutely smacking them in terms of organizing them, is that they know that people can change. And they know that people can change what they vote for, depending on how you interact with them on the grassroots. Meanwhile, the Democrats have largely left organizing in regards to issues like abortion, in regards to voting rights, up to nonprofits, which ultimately don't really do very much grassroots organizing at all. And so that's really where they've completely fumbled the ball. That's why and the way that they completely understand politics is wrong. And I think we see that with how the referendums have gone during the midterms. Socialist organizers went out, knocked on doors, and talked to people about abortion. And what we saw was that even in states that are considered red, that Democratic strategists wrote off as backwards, the people came out and they voted resoundingly in favor of abortion. They voted for progress. So when the people actually have a chance to directly raise their voices on issues that matter to them, we see that they vote in the favor of progress. We see that they vote on the right side of history. So yeah, I think ultimately what we see is presently the Democrats are weak, but the socialists and the people are strong.
Thank you, Naomi. That was beautifully said. Part of the main reason that we have organized this webinar tonight was because we were trying to understand SB106 and what it was going to mean for us organizing going forward. And we just wanted to learn more about it and, do a little thing where we learn together with our community so that we can fight it together, because that's what it takes. We need to know what we're up against so that we can organize against it. And something I kept asking myself was, why can't I find news stories on this? Why aren't the Democrats talking about this? And it comes down to them being completely fractured and disorganized and not having a strategy or being as organized as the Republicans, which is sad. But the people, like you said, we can organize, and we vastly outnumber them. So, the people coming together, and like you said, the people overwhelmingly vote for progress. We know that 84% of voters, support abortion rights. Yeah, so thank you. That just hit the nail right on the head. And that brings me to my next question, which is how will these midterm results, affect the struggle going forward?
Wow. Let me tell you, Naomi, kudos, comrade. You make me want to go out to the streets right now and fucking knock on doors. I think that was absolutely so well said and explained an aspect of the results that we saw from the midterm election. Because while the Dems want to pull out their pom poms and do handstands and backflips in the streets because of their so called stopping of the red wave, if it was not for comrades, socialists, doing the actual work to put a stop to this red wave, it would not have taken place the way it was. So while they want to break their arm and their wrist, patting themselves on the back, we who actually were doing the work on the ground should look at this in such a way that yes, the Dems are inept and have not been able to do even the smallest thing to combat the other side. We have the opportunity to look at this to say, okay, listen, we got some sort of victory here. That's one of the most difficult things about organizing is often finding victories, finding opportunities to be energized and motivated to continue to do this long, grueling, incredibly difficult, and oftentimes lonely as fuck work. These moments are an opportunity for us to gather together to say, hey, listen, the fight is not over, but this is what we were able to accomplish. This is what we were able to actually do. And then it's the opportunity to combat these horrible narratives that we saw within the slides. It's an opportunity for us to have webinars like this, to have broad discussions, to actually pinpoint the nonsense that has been spewed out and all the propaganda from the capitalist class to actually say, no, if it was not for what we have accomplished, this would have been worse. But I don't think this is a moment where we can actually sit back and have too many cocktails over this victory, because I think there's largely a ton of work still to be done. But I think we have to be really strategic in these moments and not be complacent. So I look at this opportunity, what we saw with the midterm elections, as a rallying cry. This right here is an opportunity for us to go forth and continue to organize, to continue to rally around our neighbors, to continue to support poor and working class folks across the globe, and to continue to fight. This is a huge opportunity to ride a wave of momentum and continue to push forward and continue to fight. So for me, I think that's largely the lesson here. It's an opportunity that we must seize to continue to capitalize and build and push forward.
That's absolutely right. Thank you. I actually had a friend earlier that said harm reduction voting is still harmful, especially if you do nothing to address the harm you voted for, or worse, actively defend it. And that's definitely something that I'm taking away from this. Like you said, I see this as an opportunity to organize. Electing some Democrats does not win. I mean, until this legislation is stopped, until we have codified abortion rights into law, until everyone has the right to vote, and until our votes mean something, we have not won a single thing. And so that brings me to my next point. If SB 106 is successful, what will that mean for working class communities?
I can take that one.
Thank you,
And
Kayla.
I also just want to yeah, super agree with everything that's already been said. I also want to mention briefly that the Democrats have completely ignored the city of Philadelphia throughout this campaign. I know a lot of the ads were very targeted to small town, I'm John Fennerman from a small town in Pennsylvania. I'm just like you. But they know that Philadelphia votes usually blue. And so they've just completely neglected any sort of, campaigns. They just put up signs and really didn't do anything in Philly. So I definitely feel that the negligence, and just lack of, they're not even hiding it anymore, that they don't
They
care.
completely took the urban vote for granted. They took it as a given that they did not have to work for at all.
Right, exactly. But with regards to SB 106, like Katie explained, a lot of it comes down to abortion, what they're calling abortion related medical procedures, as well as any sort of access to healthcare. So I really want people to understand that this is affecting not just people who are seeking abortions, but also anybody who takes birth control every day, for any reason. There's so many reasons people use birth control, because it's so helpful in different ways, just health, but also obviously protection, as well as Plan B. So I really want people to take away that this affects everybody. And of course, meaning that in Pennsylvania, it's going to affect mostly Black, brown, and low income people who, lack the sex education. We already have a lack of that, in the country, but there's already this huge gap of where we should be with regards to sex education and knowledge, and making the access to these, contraceptives and Plan B and everything harder. It's just going to cause even more, not just confusion, but just it's just going to be affecting women and low income people so much harder. And that also brings me to how I'm sure, we've seen from across the country and other states how the lack of access to, these healthcare abortions and things like that affect people, and how costly and dangerous it is. I know people have said when the Supreme Court ruling was first leaked, how we're reverting back to the 70s and whatnot. But not just that, but just it's one, people will have to travel to, go to somewhere that offers it. And if they can find somewhere that'll offer it for, free or low cost, safe. And then of course, there's always the risk of being caught and, persecuted for it. It's just really risky for people. And then that comes, along with legal fees and whatnot. So it's just this trap that the right wants to keep putting us into. And then once you're in, you're just gonna keep, falling into it. We're already suffering with poverty, and then these legislations would just keep pushing us down. And I want to also talk about the voting rights aspect. I know Katie did a pretty good job of explaining the exact language that was in the amendment, which I just think is so ridiculous, how you need to live in an address for at least 2 months to be able to vote from that address. But also how the one that gets me is the legislature could override the restrictions for a state of emergency, things like that. And I know this came directly from COVID, when the pandemic first hit, and Governor Tom Wolf declared a state of emergency. So if that were to happen again, something like that, where our governor, we have another huge pandemic or natural disaster, and the legislature could, if this is passed, say, you know what, no, actually, we're going to override that. And that's just going to lead to so much more death. Imagine if that happened when the pandemic first hit and, people weren't were still forced to go to work and like not get the proper PPE, like the masks and everything. Like it's just a recipe for disaster. And one more thing specifically to Philly, this isn't like voter disenfranchisement is not new. I know if people were reading the news specifically around the night of the midterm elections, it was the Republican Party filed a lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia, just the city of Philadelphia, no other county, just Philly, because they suspected that there was double voting happening, which basically they're claiming that, you know, people are actively mailing in ballots and also voting in person. Although we know this is like a complete non-issue, like it's not true, it's not happening. It's just like completely made up by the right. And the reason they're doing this, or they did this, is because they wanted to slow down the vote count, because it would require polling places and workers to count count the mail-in ballots again and slow down the process. We saw this happen in 2020 where, you know, with the presidential election, where they slowed down the process in a mostly, you know, Democrat heavy and also Black heavy city. Obviously it's very targeted because it's in Philly, and like slowing it down so that the Republicans could say, oh, all right, the vote's been like, we're ahead, we're going to declare victory early, and ignoring all of the processes in place to have any sort of fair election. And yeah, I just want to emphasize that like this was a Republican Party initiative or lawsuit. However, the courts did say this is not, like they struck it down and said, you know, Philly doesn't have to implement this, but the city commissioners did still implement it, which is just like a small 3-person elections board. So it just goes to show that like the Republicans might have these ideas to implement these, you know, far right and undemocratic processes, but the Democrats are going along with it. And like Naomi said, they're not doing anything to stop it. And so, yeah, I just also want to emphasize how this is affecting not just like, it's not just like a amendment that is going along with everything else. It's like going to be an amendment in the state constitution. So the courts would not be able to rule against it. The governor could not veto it. They're just packing it with anything they can to prevent a democratic process.
Thank you, Kayla. And I mean, we can see how this strategy is like circular, right? The judiciary makes a decision like Dobbs, or you know, the having the state legislatures you know, decide these elections, it all like kind of feeds into each other, right? Like being able to undermine the democratic process and undermine the vote gives them the power to claim voter fraud and institute these undemocratic processes, which then, you know, actually give like legitimacy to them doing that and stealing the election. So it's this really circular kind of motion where they are you know, stealing the vote by stealing the vote. It's really kind of wild. You know, my county council meetings lately have been completely flooded with people talking about this completely imaginary issue of ballot box stuffing during the entire public comment period, which is, it's strange. And, you know, they're putting this in people's heads so that they can undermine democracy and undermine people's votes. And it's really sinister. So that brings me to my next question. Why should workers care about this attack on our democratic rights? Why should workers care that this attack against democracy is happening?
I can take that, but before
you.
I kind of begin, I want to say something about like the Democrats neglecting Philly. I was watching, so I'm from Pittsburgh, but I was watching the World Series a few weeks ago. Sorry, Philly people. And as I'm watching it, these political ads come on and it's like ad after ad of like Oz, and I'm waiting for a Fetterman ad, I'm waiting for a Democrat ad, because it's like, people in Philadelphia are gonna be watching the World Series, and it just never happens. So, honestly, I don't know how like people in the Democratic Party make their money, because they seem really bad at their job. But I have to, again, almost assume that, their job is not actually to get a lot of votes out. Their job is to split the working class. But why should you care about your rights being taken away? That's like kind of a little bit self-obvious, but it is useful to dive into. So first, if you like the mythology that gets presented to us by the ruling class is almost that your democratic rights don't matter, right? The system works, if there's some crisis, it will be resolved within the normal course of governance. If there are problems happening, this is somehow not representative of the system. It's a distortion, et cetera, et cetera. But if you look at the history of the United States, this is very clearly not true. When the United States was founded, the right to vote was extremely limited to white property men, which was an extremely small fraction of the country. We used to not be able to vote for like our senators. They were decided by state legislatures. So talking about how state legislatures can usurp democracy. Black people used to not be able to vote. Women used to not be able to vote. At every moment when the working class has kind of struggled to expand basic democratic rights, the capitalist class has been there to push back. And that really is how the system normally works, where the ruling class piles on pressure and exploitation and shame and all of these forces on the working class. And it's up to us, it's up to people who understand what's happening and can see it, to organize ourselves and to build a mass movement. Because at the end of the day, no matter what period you look at in US history, it's always been an organized fighting mass movement that has gained rights, right? And these mass movements have been most affected when they are able to unify across racial boundaries, gender boundaries, the rural-urban divide. Basically, when the working class gains the consciousness to understand that we're being screwed over by the ruling class. And that's not an easy thing to do, but it starts with, like people on this call, getting organized, talking to their neighbors, doing whatever they can, and doing those kinds of basic actions like we were talking about before, where it's like, okay, an election's coming up, I'm going to go around knocking door to door and talk to other members in my community, because we also live in a very isolating world. The other thing that's kind of relevant is that there's a narrative going around on the left that's been around for a while, that, oh, well, we don't really live in a real democracy, so the democratic rights that we do have, it's like kind of take it or leave it. That's, I think, very silly. First of all, I mean, you can consider the perspective. It's disrespectful to all the people who really fought and died for this, right? And it's disrespectful to the future generations and yourself who need these rights. But it's also, silly. You can understand that we don't have a true democracy while still valuing what democracy we do have. And it's actually useful, the correct formulation isn't we don't live in a real democracy, so democracy doesn't matter. It's we don't live in a real democracy, so we should fight for real democracy. If we really had the right to abortion, the right to vote in this country, the right to basic democratic rights, things like Election Day would be a holiday, like it is in most countries, right? So people could actually go out and vote and not have to risk missing their job. We would have universal health care so that, oh, you have a right to abortion, but if you can't miss work because like you need to physically and emotionally recover from the procedure, you know, you feel like you can't get it, do you really have the right to an abortion? If you can't get an abortion because you can't afford it, do you really have a right to an abortion? So, you know, the struggle for basic democratic rights and why basic democratic rights are important is because, you know, it improves the lives of the working class. And you know, it's yours, right? When the ruling class takes your rights away, they're taking something from you, you know? And it's hard to feel like you own it when it's under attack all the time, but you really do. And they're honestly being disrespectful to you, and you should stand up for yourself and like other members of your community.
Thank you. Yeah. I really like what you said about you know, democracy, you know, not being, I'm not sure I can even say it the way that you said it, so I'm not even going to try. But thank you. That was really powerful. Like you said, these rights are ours. People fought for these rights and we do need them. It's incredibly privileged. It is an incredibly privileged take to think that these rights don't matter, because they do. You know, and that also goes back to, you know, the harm reduction thing that I was talking about. You know, it's incredibly privileged to be able to completely ignore, you know, what is happening nationally, you know, with these rights and these attacks on our rights. We have to fight for them. The working class deserves it. The people are worth it. So this next question, I definitely want to direct to June, you know, because you are from Pittsburgh. And I think the understanding of what you know, an attack on abortion access looks like is pretty, it's more well understood, I think, in places like Philadelphia than Pittsburgh. But I would like to hear from others as well after. But June, can you tell us a little bit about you know, what this attack on abortion access would look like, you know, in the Pittsburgh area?
Yeah, sure. So Pittsburgh, for I guess anybody that may not be aware, is in the western half of the state. So, and it's also part of Appalachia. So one of the really important dynamics about the attack on abortion is that in Pennsylvania is that Pittsburgh is actually a location for many people out of state who need to get an abortion and it's not available in their own state, either because there's literally not enough abortion centers or because it's illegal. Which means that, you know, when the Republicans, as we were kind of talking about earlier, we can't view this as a situation where, you know, SB106 or any kind of anti-abortion legislation is just an attack on, you know, people living in Pennsylvania. It's an attack on the working class everywhere in this country. So there's that aspect. The second aspect is that Pittsburgh is absolutely dominated by these very large healthcare companies, specifically UPMC, so University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is like a research institution connected to the University of Pittsburgh. And it's technically a nonprofit. It doesn't have any employees, but actually makes tons of money. And there's like tons of interests involved in it. And, you know, despite the fact that Pittsburgh is the home to all of these great hospitals, abortion access, maternal healthcare access, all kinds of healthcare access is not equally distributed. It's not equally accessible to everybody. Allegheny County, which is the county Pittsburgh is located in, is actually the worst county in the country when it comes to Black maternal healthcare rates, which is absolutely unacceptable, to put it bluntly. So, you know, the struggle for abortion access in Pennsylvania is both like across state boundaries when it comes to, you know, making sure people can still get access to abortions. It's a problem of where money goes to underneath our current medical system, because UPMC is very focused on like research and developing quote unquote innovative cures to, you know, things, to diseases and problems that a small number of people have. Because if you're a business, you know, or if you're interested in healthcare for profit and not for improving the health of human beings, having very specialized procedures, you can charge a lot more money. So that means that there's more money going into like high tech things than basic healthcare access, ensuring that everybody has it in the city of Pittsburgh, in the surrounding area. The UP, I don't know what it's like in Philadelphia and other cities, but UPMC is like pretty consistently, the emergency rooms are getting filled up because of COVID and like the flu and stuff like that, which makes it difficult for people to get access to healthcare. And I really just have to wonder, where's all the money that UPMC is investing? Like, where is it going? Because quite frankly, I think that if our healthcare system is not designed or is not able to, handle crises, which are inevitable on the planet Earth, right? Because there are always going to be problems and there are always going to be disasters, and we're always going to be need to be ready to fix them. If we're not considering these things that we know are coming at some point, then there's something wrong. So I kind of took that answer a little bit farther, but definitely abortion access is important in Pittsburgh, so other people can have access to it, and then also making sure that it's equal and not racist.
Yeah, thank you so much, June. I wanted to hop on this as well. And I love the point that you raised about how it's all interconnected, right? Like the way that certain cities currently are functioning as hubs for people from multiple different states to come to access abortion because abortion is now outlawed in their own state, I think is really salient. One thing I just was thinking about was the lack of access to abortion that already exists in rural areas of Pennsylvania, and the funding of crisis pregnancy centers in those areas that actively are like taking funds from working people. So I know there was a report from The Guardian in 2021 that found that Pennsylvania was one of the states that was skimming into TANF funds and using and giving that money away to crisis pregnancy centers. So we have, this system that's been set up completely legally by the ruling class to take money away from working people to fund organizations that actively serve to disenfranchise them of their reproductive rights, that actively exist to shame them and discourage them from obtaining a medical procedure that is very important to them, that may be the most financially viable for them, that may be medically necessary. And so, yeah, that was just one thing I was thinking about, was how the way that the healthcare system is set up, especially in regards to reproductive rights in rural areas, healthcare is already far and few between to find in those areas, and B, that for people who are seeking an abortion, most likely what they will find in a Google search is a crisis pregnancy center that is literally being funded by money that was stolen from them.
Yeah, just to add one more thing with regards to Philly as well. It's very different from the rural areas of Pennsylvania, but I really want to underline how these policies are always attacking the cities like Philadelphia with the largest Black population. And I mean, low income throughout, like rural areas also struggle a lot with it. That's not just like a Philly issue, but just emphasizing how they're always coming for the cities with majority POC. And it's just, yeah, with also like not just abortion access, but in Philly, I know like with the recent, like June was mentioning, like COVID and flu season and RSV, I know a lot of the hospitals are just like over capacity and have been like there. And the people up top, I have a friend who's a nurse at CHOP, the Children's Hospital. They'll always talk about like, oh, we're finally, like controlling the capacity so we can talk, we can do more now, and like we're under capacity, like yay, but it isn't, and it has not been since like definitely since COVID hit, but even before that, it's just like, and I know in rural PA too, like there's just so many hospitals that are having to shut down because they don't have, any of the funding to continue anymore, and all of these, private clinics, as well, are just like not seeing the profit that they want. So they're just going to shut down and just like leave everyone astray. So really it's just a whole, yeah, I'm glad we're talking with everybody from the entire state, because it's just like everything is connected. And, and like we might feel like, you know, especially in Philly, I feel like it's a common sentiment that like, you know, Philly is separate from the rest of the state, but we're really not. We have a lot more similar, you know, similarities and things in common, and we should be fighting together, joining together to fight against these legislations.
Yeah, and our interests are the same, and it is certainly not the same interests of the ruling class. You know, we are all working class people, and we are the ones that are running this society. We keep things moving. Um, so yeah, I mean, here in Delaware County too, you know, we've been facing a huge hospital closure struggle for the last, you know, year, with private companies, you know, bailing once the, you know, the profits dry up at the hospitals. And of course, the first thing to go is family planning services. So how can we organize and fight back against initiatives like SB106?
Yeah, I can just jump in. I'm like so riled up now.
Thank you.
But yeah, I mean, so like I said, we need to really, this is a statewide issue. And we can't be siloed in our own cities and towns. And I really want to encourage everyone on here and everyone, you know, who knows people interested in this sort of thing to, I mean, one, educate and connect with your own communities, whether that's your family, you know, neighbors, classmates, you know, coworkers. A lot of it comes down to just like, I know me personally, it's always hard and intimidating with legal things, like, oh, that's so complicated. Like, I have no idea how that works. But actually we have each other to break it down together and talk about it. And also really emphasize to people, and don't be scared to talk about it with people, because the majority of people in Pennsylvania support abortions. And so I feel like with Pennsylvania, there's this like false narrative that the right, you know, in the rural is so right wing and against abortions and like not progressive at all, but that's not true. And especially with regards to abortions, it's really just like such a false narrative. And so we need to remember that, like, not only with abortion too, but I don't think any working class person is for the like robbing of their rights and democratic rights that we have. And so, yeah, talking about that and just like how this is happening, or this is, you know, the legislators are trying to make this happen based on the fact that they don't think we can do anything about it. And also another thing is that, like I said, with the statewide, we really need to have this broad, like consistent and united movement with all kinds of people, and people who not only just like are affected by these issues, but people who care. And that's basically, I mean, mostly everybody will be affected by these, you know. And so we really need to come together. I mean, it's been done before, like with the militant feminist movement in the 70s, who got together and made Roe v. Wade happen. And as well as like, even we're thinking about voting rights, like the civil rights movement happened because people came together. At that time, I don't think people thought it was possible. You know, people definitely felt like the odds were against them. The ruling class definitely like thought that they could get away with this stuff and keep regressing society, but the people came together. And so I really want to emphasize that, like, we shouldn't feel overwhelmed or scared or hopeless. And we should really think about, like, it's been done before, we can do it again. We just need to be connected together and united. And so with that, I think finding an organization is really important, and also getting other organizations who care about this issue joining us is really important, because we don't want to be, you know, doing this alone. We want it truly to be a statewide initiative involving every small town, everybody, you know, around the state. And so even if you're not already involved in an organization, like, I would really encourage you to check out our website, which is the pafораbortion.org. our social media, like definitely look into how you can get in touch. If there's no organizations like, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, or, like a community center like the Liberation Center, definitely reach out so that we can get you in touch with organizers, because we're willing to go wherever it takes, where the people are, and go to, connect. We're in Pittsburgh, Lancaster, Chester County, Philadelphia, like all over, Reading, Lehigh Valley, Delaware Valley. So we're willing to, make the effort to meet up with people, because we think it's not possible with just us. And so we really need everyone to get involved. And yeah, just reach out to the website or our social media, because we have some resources and experience in this area and would love to, share it and spread it around.
Thank you, Kayla. You got me pumped. And I think it is easy for people to forget that, militant struggle is what won these rights in the first place. It's, we're far enough removed that people, can easily forget those things. But that's how these rights were won in the first place. Like you said, we've done it before. We can do it again. The working class united, like Maddie said in the chat, can never be defeated. So, okay, before my final question for the panelists, I do want to remind all of our attendants that we'll be taking some questions after this. So please feel free to type any questions you have right in the chat or in the Q&A box. We've got a little bit of time to, talk a little bit more. And that can be questions about SB106 itself. It can be questions about anything that we've talked about, anything, that you have in mind related to what we've been talking about tonight. So my final question is, how can we use this assault on our basic democratic rights to build the movement for a socialist reconstruction?
I can go first, but I would love to
Amazing.
hear what other panelists have to think as well, or if there's any responses to this question, because I think, I don't know if everybody has this book. If you don't, you should buy it, you should get it. But that's the point of this book, and that's the point of building this movement for socialist reconstruction, is to have discussion, to talk about what is our future, what is the new world that we want to build. And I think, in regards to this assault on our basic democratic rights that are happening right now, millions of people in America are currently robbed of the ability to partake in the wealth they create and shape the world that they build with their own hands, right? We see this with gerrymandering, we see this with racist redistricting, and we see this with legislative tactics like SB106. And the current attacks on democratic rights, these are just the next step in centuries of disenfranchisement of marginalized working class communities. I think we all know that history very well. And I think something that the question is like, why now? Why start saying, well, we want to roll back all of these gains, especially when it comes to voting now? And I think that this blatant assault on the few rights available in a bourgeois democracy indicates that the ruling class is afraid of the growing class consciousness in this country. In a time when we are facing existential crises like climate change and fascism, the answer is very clear. It will be socialism, or it will be the end of the world. The capitalist class is terrified to hear what the people will say if they are given a voice, because the answer is that their time has come, and it is time for a new world and a new system. The assault on our democratic rights is another chance for us to build with our class. Through mass organizations and party work, like Kayla was talking about, we should develop and test strategies and methodologies for organizing with our class and confronting the right wing head on. Our advantage as socialists is that socialists focus on developing the consciousness of our class from where they stand and the material conditions that they face. Like Kayla was just talking about, other mainstream politicians write off areas like the rural parts of Pennsylvania as right-wing and lost. But the reason why we had those victories in the referendums on abortion was because our socialist comrades, they said, no, we don't believe that. We want to actually talk to our members of our class and say, is that actually what you want? Do you actually want to no longer have the right to abortion? And the people resoundingly said, no, we want to continue to protect this right. And so that's really our advantage, is that we actually care about what our class is thinking. We actually care about how we will seize our future together. You know, the question really is, if the right wing plans on taking away the one thing that even a bourgeois democracy says is its defining feature and the thing that makes it the greatest system in the world, then what real say do you actually have in your fate and your future? And more importantly, what kind of a say do you want to have? How much of a say do you want to have? So to build the movement for a socialist reconstruction, we offer ourselves up as the alternative to these establishment parties that fundamentally do not care about the working class and simply continue to exploit them. The people are looking for a party that has the strength to build a future, not a party that just tells them to vote harder. We are that party. The Party for Socialism and Liberation is that party. Our program and our materials offer bold and daring proposals about how to reshape the world to benefit people instead of profit. In this book, we talk about abolishing debt. We talk about building a new healthcare system that actually prioritizes people instead of profit to address the issues that June was talking about. In this book, we talk about what it would actually mean to build an actual democracy that that gives one vote to every person in this country and actually allows the people of this country to have a say in the world that they create. And I just wanted to finish with an excerpt from the book that I think is so powerful and that I really want us all to take away tonight, which is the feeling of wanting to reconstruct society, to repair injustices, and to more effectively organize our common world. Those feelings represent your deeper hunger for another system. They are cravings for power, not individual but collective power, where the best ideas to serve humanity and the planet can be applied and tested in real life. In the capitalist present, such a world may seem like a dream, but it is not. It can happen here.
Thank you, Naomi. That was beautiful. So much of what you just said really reminded me why I joined this organization in the first place. Because I see the Party for Socialism and Liberation as a vehicle for the working class to realize and take power. The PSL has taught me that we have the knowledge, the skills, and the resources to run the world. And we need the decision, we need to take the power, we need to take the reins and really, make those decisions that will propel the world forward in, a not oppressive, a justified way that will, stop climate change, that will give the people a real democracy, that will give, that will hold our human rights as sacred. And yeah, really just give us the power to build the society that humans are worthy of. So yeah, any of my other fellow panelists have thoughts on that? Again, how can we use this assault on our basic democratic rights to build the movement for a socialist reconstruction?
Yeah, so real quick, in case anybody's not aware, so Reconstruction was a historical period in the United States after the Civil War, where after enslaved Black people were no longer enslaved, there is a period of very radical and progressive economic, social, and political process called Reconstruction, where basically it was like, well, what the hell do we do now? And this took place predominantly in the South, and there were lots of ideas and energy revolving around making the economy more democratic, for the people being representatives actually representing the population that they were coming from. So, there were a lot more Black Congresspeople and Black senators and Black legislators locally, and there's all this energy, and it basically, got destroyed because the northern half of the ruling class said, we don't really like you guys that much, and we're gonna, as long as the southern half of the ruling class is willing to bend the knee, we're gonna let them continue exploiting you. So for socialist reconstruction, you know, one of the things that we've kind of talked about a lot in this webinar is this rural-urban divide. And I do think that this is a great opportunity for us to talk to just other members of our class in general, but also to begin breaking down the siloing that happens between urban centers and rural communities in our country, in our state. Because when you think about it, you know, I honestly don't know really all that much what it's like to live in rural Pennsylvania. And I really doubt a rural Pennsylvania understands what it's like to live in Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or anything like that. Mostly because, as we've talked about, it's a very deliberate kind of thing done by the ruling class, where the radio waves and social media and TV are saturated depending on where you are geographically, and basically wherever you fall into on the algorithm, where you're just going to be force-fed a bunch of content that is not really truthful and is pushing a specific agenda by the ruling class. And you'll begin to think that other members of the working class who have also been brainwashed just as much as you, who have also been lied to just as much as you, are your enemies. And that your friends are the particular section of the ruling class that like pretends to advocate for you. So I think that's one opportunity that this will have. And then also just like economically, the fact that infrastructure in our state is so terrible and there's not that physical transportation between places and that physical in-person exchanging of experiences, I think is something that I'm really excited about when we do win power and we do begin reconstructing our society.
Thank you, June.
If I could jump in real fast, I actually have a point about socialist reconstruction as well. Can you guys hear me okay?
Please, yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm working my way through the book right now, as well as I've listened to the socialist program episode about it. And what I appreciate most about the book, Socialist Reconstruction, is it really does give us like such a new vision for what the future could look like. And in this bourgeois democracy, we're so stuck in this like fishbowl of like, oh, imagine if we had reproductive rights. Imagine if we had rights for LGBTQ people, when we could be imagining a total overhaul of the way that we think of reproductive labor in general. And you see these attacks from the right wing and they say, you know, these people who are in favor of abortion are like baby killers, things like that. But us on the left, we know that abortion oftentimes is done out of economic necessity. And imagine how many people wouldn't even need abortion if we could, you know, they felt comfortable that their rights were guaranteed, that they would have clothes to put on their backs every day. If work was distributed in a way that they would have free time to take care of their kids rather than hiring a nanny, or you know, that they felt confident that they were going to have a child that's born into a world where climate change isn't an issue that's going to affect their whole life, and they're going to be able to feed their kids and have generations and be guaranteed housing. This book has done so much to completely open up my mind about the vision that we could have for the future. And I think that sharing this vision is a step in making a better world. And you know, in the system that we have right now, people are so just going day to day trying to figure out how they're going to get their next meal, get their next vote, get whatever it is, when there's a whole world that people could be imagining together that could be so much different, and we wouldn't even have to have conversations like this. So that's all I want to say. I think it's an excellent read, and together, like, we really can make a better world as long as we have a vision for it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Katie, June, Elgin, Naomi, Kayla, all of you, you know, for all of these brilliant insights into these, you know, very scary, daunting, you know, things that we're up against. Again, that book, Socialist Reconstruction, that some of my comrades have mentioned, there is a link in the chat. It is at liberationstore.org. There it is again. Thank you so much, June. And now I have some questions from our attendants, and I'm going to ask panelists if we can keep these answers brief. We really do want to respect everybody's time. We just have about 8 minutes left and like a handful, not as many questions. So yeah, if we can keep it to about a minute. And our first one is, could you explain the connection between SB 106 and independent state legislature theory a little bit more. Anybody itching to talk about that? That's fine. I can talk a little bit about that. Um, like I said before, there's really a mirroring there with the taking away the one person, one vote theory. You know, the auditing procedures not being, you know, in the hands of a democratic process. You know, we're looking at a process where in both of these situations where, you know, the party that controls the state legislature is able to claim fraud, and then instead of counting the votes from the people and using that, you know, to elect, you know, the person who was being voted for, so on and so forth. They give that power to an auditor or an elector who was not elected democratically. And these things really mirror each other. You know, one is happening at the state level and one is happening nationally, but it's really just a way to completely, you know, wipe away democracy by the election auditing process being disrupted and, you know, being undemocratic. I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Can I actually jump in real quick too?
Sure. Yeah, I was just gonna say we often, you know, hear people on the right saying like we're a republic, not a democracy. That's exactly what they're talking about with, you know, this power, you know, resting with the state legislature instead of you know, with voting and with the people. You know, and the Constitution of the United States doesn't say the word democracy in it anywhere. And so in that way, they're correct. You know, the founding fathers did not want a democracy. They wanted class rule. They wanted to be the ruling class because they were the aristocrats of their time. And so, you know, this isn't new. It's just, you know, that the people have been brainwashed to believe that this is democratic all of this time when it's not. Sorry, go ahead, Kayla.
No, not at all. I don't have too much to add because you explained it really well, but I just wanted to help picture what this would look like just thinking about the 2020 elections and the January 6th, you know, whatever happened there, like that could be what happens in Pennsylvania, and like how the Republicans can just take complete control, like void everyone's votes and just like make their own decision. And in this doesn't act alone, it acts with the rest of the other amendments, like Echo mentioned, like the auditing. So it's just like they're constantly putting these small pieces together in order to create a, you know, scenario, in order to create a system where we just like cannot do anything about it. And it's like they would be completely legal and justified by the law in doing something like this.
Yeah, exactly. It would be January 6th, but quietly and legal, completely legal. So our next question is, can we talk about abortion and how LGBTQ rights are connected and how important that connection is?
Yeah, sure, I can touch upon it briefly.
Thanks, Jude.
So first, I think the most obvious connection is, you know, ideologically, when abortion rights are attacked, it is basically the ruling class saying you do not have the right to bodily autonomy. And for LGBTQ people, especially like trans people, I mean, that's obviously very important because, you know, in order to transition and to not be dysphoric and to like live a happy, healthy life, in the same way that somebody might need to get an abortion to live a happy, healthy life, it requires me to be able to go to my doctor and talk about, you know, how I'm feeling and what I need, and to not be scared of repression, and to be able to get access to the drugs that I need to do that. The second thing is at the economic, like material level, because it's very unprofitable to just have an abortion center, especially in like rural areas. that means most of the time, a lot of these services are combined into one place that's like a Planned Parenthood. So when the ruling class says, okay, well, abortions are no longer legal, that is now cutting off a source of income for these like abortion centers, which again often function as like trans healthcare centers and stuff like that, which means that they are more likely to go out of business because they need to be making money, right? Because healthcare is not recognized as a human right. So there's that economic attack that's a little bit more subtle. And then the last thing I'll say is that there is a rising Christian evangelical far right in our country, and especially in Pennsylvania. And so obviously, or, you know, as you probably all know, the LGBTQ community is another favorite punching bag for them to rouse up the spirits of like people who don't really know what's going on, who think that legitimately they're like kitty litter boxes in high schools nowadays for like, I don't even know. So I mean, it is like scary for sure. But no, I think that's the connection of this is a broad spectrum attack on oppressed people, and it needs to be resisted by everybody in the working class.
Thank you, June. That's really well said. Yeah, you know, the women's liberation struggle and the LGBTQ struggle are really, they go hand in hand, you know what I mean? And yeah, I see these things as being so related. And like June said, you know, if they're coming for abortion now, they are most definitely going to come for trans healthcare next. It's most certainly one of their favorite punching bags. And yeah, we have to stand together so that we can stop them from taking away our rights and each other's rights. Because, you know, by working together and standing together and seeing that our rights and our struggles are intertwined is the only way, you know, that we can really, you know, push back and stop that. So my next question is, could you talk a little bit about what are important points or things to emphasize when talking to those who don't like to vote in these elections? People who think that both sides are equally evil. Essentially, what would be good to say to convince people to vote, unmotivated voters to vote? Elgin, I see you.
Yes, I will take this one very quickly. To be clear, we feel the same way. None of these parties are worth a damn. They're all trash. Voting in and of itself does not accomplish what we poor working class people need, but it can be a method of reducing harm and alleviating certain aspects of oppression. It does not alleviate oppression in of itself. So what I typically advise people in my community who have the same mindset, what the fuck am I voting for? Why is voting important? Is explaining the issues, explaining how there is a trickle down effect. If you don't participate in one, the type of advantage it gives either party to continue a certain method and form of oppression. So what we are voting for typically is to reduce harm and to somehow wiggle away to get some relief from the oppressive nature of this whole electoral shitstorm that we find ourselves in.
And then hopefully along the way, we can have conversations like this and really dig into what's actually going on and how we can actually organize to actually stop oppression and, you know, win our rights militantly together, because we most definitely can and will do so. Thank you so much, comrades. I am going to end it there. Like I said, we do want to respect everybody's time. We do have another song to play for you for folks if you want to stick around. This will not be the last that you'll hear from us on this issue. We are going to be having a monthly event at the Philadelphia Liberation Center going forward for the PA for Abortion campaign. We will definitely, you know, you'll see that on the website. You'll see that on our social medias. Please keep an eye out for those things. And again, this is a statewide campaign. Organizers are working across the state on this issue constantly. So please be on the lookout, for events. You can sign the petition, you can volunteer, you can donate to the campaign. But please, continue to show up, continue to fight with us, with the working class, and we can and we will win. Thank you so much, everybody.